This didn't even occur to me to talk about until someone brought it up in the YouTube comments a little while ago. Skyboxes are a fairly common thing to have in 3D games. They allow you to have an actual, well, sky around the player instead of just a black background or whatever it was that I had before. And they're actually really easy to do. They're exactly what it sounds like they are. It's just a box, a cube, 6 sides around the player, and each side has a picture on it, which usually means a seamless image of sky. For the record, I don't know how this photograph is taken. I assume that somebody had a 360-degree camera or something. But that's neither here nor there. So I'm going to exit out of that. This is what the project looks like now, as of the first-person movement video. You can see that there's the floor and the background is just the abyss. No sky whatsoever. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, go on Google, on the internet somewhere, and look up a Skybox image. I got the one in the demo from Open Game Art. You can go on Open Game Art. The quality of the stuff that you find on Open Game Art varies, but I did find a few interesting looking Skyboxes. There are a couple that people have posted and just let you use in your game free of charge. I believe it was this one, the one that I'm using. Yeah, that looks like it. I'll have a link in the description of the video.
Hey.
So you'll download the Skybox images, and it will give you a collection of 6 pictures. I will zoom in on it so that you can see. There's the top, there's left, right, front, back, and there's the bottom. Generally, the bottom isn't something that you'll actually see because there's going to be the floor underneath you. But just so that there isn't if the player does accidentally see it, just so that there isn't an actual abyss down there, it's not a bad idea to have one. You'll notice that I arranged this like a sideways cross. This is usually how you see box shapes unwrapped. 6 sides, front, back, left, right, top, and bottom. I put them in order so that it looks like the sides flow into each other. You don't necessarily have to do this as long as you map the. This is going to come down to a lot of texture mapping, which I talked about a couple of videos ago. As long as you map the texture coordinates on the image to the correct place on the box, you should be fine. Next, you're going to go and create a box. If you're a real 3D modeler, you will be using Blender or something, but I am not, so I'm still using Model Creator for GameMaker. I am going to just make a square. A block, rather. It doesn't really matter what the dimensions are. I'll just make it minus 16 to positive 16. Minus 16 in all directions to positive 16 in all directions. Horizontal and vertical repetition doesn't matter because I will be leaving that as it is anyway. I'm going to convert the square to triangles. Let's turn the lighting off and turn the edges on so that you can see the cube a little bit better. Next, let's load in a texture. If you don't want to see me actually creating a skybox because you already know how that sort of thing works, feel free to skip ahead in the video. I will hopefully have a timestamp on the screen to when we're getting back to actual code. There is the skybox image. I guess I'll load the alpha channel. There's no reason not to. And okay, there's now a texture on the box. That is not what we really want it to look like, though. So let's zoom in on the texture. Let's mess with the texture a little bit. I'm going to shrink the size of the texture a little bit instead of making it the entire square. 2. Now that we've got the actual cube with the same texture on every face. Okay, at least the box is starting to look like something. You will notice that the faces on this box are facing outwards because faces in 3D graphics they're generally one way, so they can be facing outwards or inwards. I'm going to invert the faces down here in Model Creator, the F hotkey. And if you're using Blender or something more dedicated to 3D graphics, then you'll probably be able to do it in a similar way. And that's going to turn the cube inside out so that we can see, so that it looks like we're on the inside of a room rather than looking at a box from the outside. And now it's just a matter of actually putting the faces in the right place. I'm going to select each square and see if I can get the see if I can put the sides in the correct place. If I were to turn off the edges, you can see it looks like those two edges are supposed to go next to each other, those two faces. The next one would be here. And where does that go? Oops. I deselected it by accident. Stop that, self. Okay, that looks good. I think. Again, let's check by turning the edges off. There we go. And the last one. Oh, by the way, the O key on the keyboard is the shortcut to select a face by clicking on it in Model Creator for GameMaker, in case anybody was wondering. And M is the key that lets you move things around. Okay. Are those the sides? That looks like all of the sides are in the right place. Now it's just a matter of the top and bottom. This is upside down. It's not a huge deal if the box is upside down or not, but because I know that someone's going to question me about why the Skybox is upside down. Let's do that. You can rotate it 100 degrees around the X or Y axis. You can scale the selection down here, which is what I did. You can, if you want to, mirror the selection along the Z axis to flip it upside down. That also put the faces right side out again, so I'm going to invert them once more. Lastly, the top and bottom. The bottom of this particular Skybox is a flat color, a flat gray color. So it's not going to have to be rotated to make it line up with the sides or anything. And lastly, the top. There we go. Okay, so that is going to have to be rotated to make it align correctly with the pictures on the sides. I'm going to rotate it around the Z-axis by 90 degrees until it looks right. That does not look right. That does not look right either. Once more should do it. There we go. Okay, so if I were to zoom in on it a little bit, you can see, I wish I could turn the actual axes off down there, because that's kind of annoying. It now looks like you can't really see that it's a square, except for the annoying little fuzzing on the edges, because Model Creator for GameMaker is very old and imperfect in some regards.
Hey.
So I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it Skybox.gmmod. You can call it Skybox.d3d if you want. The file extension does not matter. Let's see. The next thing that you're going to want to do is, one, find... Oh, where did I put it? All right, here it is. Find the texture image on your computer. This is what it looks like, and drag it into the sprites in GameMaker. I'm going to rename it SPR_Skybox just so that it's not the name isn't conflicting with anything. There are a few things you'll want to note about this. One, I haven't talked about texture pages really before in GameMaker, except for this separate texture page option. You'll want to check that. You'll also want to have the texture be a power of 2. You want it to be a square, and you'll want the side lengths to be a power of 2. So 2048 in my case. That could be 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, anything like that. The reason that it needs to be a square has to do with the way that GameMaker does 3D textures internally. 3D textures or something else. The way that GameMaker does texture coordinates internally, especially for use with 3D, but also with for use with 2D. Having this much empty space in the image isn't the most efficient use of computer memory, but I'm just here to show you how it works, not to optimize it today. The next thing you'll need to do is you'll need to take the Skybox model that you created and drag it into your game's included files. Skybox.gmmod. You can call it whatever you want. Again, the file extension doesn't matter. Next, you'll need to load this into your game. I have, once again, in the past, I have talked about loading models from files, both GameMaker models, these things, and OBJ models. I do not currently have those scripts inside this project here, but I will add them. I will go to load model, which is what I want. There's also the other script for this that I wrote is load OBJ. If you have not watched those videos that I made on those in the past, I will leave links in the description and in a little card that should be popping out in the corner of the video right now. Have I been remembering to add those? I hope I have. That'll be awkward if I haven't. Anyway, click on that if you want to learn how these scripts work. In a nutshell, they take in a 3D object file and create a vertex buffer out of it that you can use in the game. So after that, I'm going to load the model into the game. And what is wrong here? Number of arguments expected 0. That's not right. Did it just take the IntelliSense a minute to update? There we go. So we're going to be loading the Skybox model into the game. This is just a vertex buffer, just like the floor, the grid on the floor. It's a vertex buffer. So we can jump on back over to the camera's draw event. And right now, the only thing that I'm drawing is the floor. You can also draw the skybox. Just like this. And this isn't going to quite work. This isn't the only thing you need to do. There's more setup that you need to do. And I will get to that after I show you what it's going to look like. If you're thinking ahead a little bit, you probably already know. Oh, you know what? Derp. That'll do. I was just drawing the floor twice instead of the skybox. So there is now a skybox, and it's just, like I said, it's just a vertex buffer that's it's being drawn just like the floor. So since it's just a 32 by 32 cube, and we're not telling it to do anything special, that's what we're going to see. Not exactly what we want. So if you want to take this in literal terms, you can matrix set, matrix world. Matrices are how you transform stuff in 3D space. If you don't know how those work, I made a video on those as well, which I will also link in the description and in a card. Matrix build. Let's not translate it for now. Let's not rotate it, but let's scale it up a good 100 times in every direction. And then once we're done drawing the skybox, we can reset it. So we'll start with that. And okay, that's, except for being upside down, which again, because GameMaker has a funny idea of the up axis, I should really just make a video on how to correct that so that you can use Z up if you want to, because that's how I'm used to working, with positive Z being the up direction in 3D. And the main reason that I've just ignored that in this tutorial series is because I don't want to get hung up on details instead of actually making progress towards a 3D world. And I should probably just sit down and deal with that someday. But that day is not today. Let's make the Z scale -100 instead of +100. There we go. You can see the sky is above us and the sort of abyss is below us instead of the other way around. This has some this is not a perfect solution. For one, the box is still being drawn at a fixed point in space. It's quite large. It's got a side length of 32 times 100 is 3,200. If you were to move the camera far enough away, if you were to walk just in a direction for a long time, you would find yourself outside the skybox. You could draw it relative to the camera. You could use X from, Y from, Z from as your, you could move the box relative to the camera. But that's better, but that's still not the perfect solution. I will never be outside the skybox anymore. I will never have the camera outside the skybox, but you still have to contend with other things being outside the skybox. If you were to draw something way off in the distance and it was farther away than than one of the planes in the skybox, you would see it clipping through it. And there's also the clipping planes of the camera itself, where the computer will actually just not draw things that are a certain distance away from the camera. If the clipping distance is shorter than the far edges of the skybox, you would just see it disappear, and it would look very strange. So there's something else you're allowed to do, and I find it quite useful. So I'm going to keep the x from y from z from as the translation. I'm going to keep 1, 1, -1 as the scaling. I'm going to use 1, 1, -1 as the scaling rather, instead of blowing it up by a factor of 100. And I'm going to use a function called GPU set z right enable, and I'm going to set that to false. This is one of the things that I believe I said is just kind of an automatic when it comes to 3D in GameMaker Studio 2, or 3D in pretty much any graphics library ever. You have z test enable and z right enable. And to draw the skybox, I'm going to turn off z right enable when I draw the skybox, and I'm going to turn it back on. So now I'm going to run the game. And you still have the skybox. It still looks as it did before. There are still the seams on the sides and in the corners, and it didn't do that in my test project, right? Okay, my test project doesn't have that. I will try to find it. Is there something wrong with the texture itself? Oh, okay, there's something wrong with the texture itself. That's why that is. I think that's why that is.
Hey.
Let's see. This is my test project. Oh, nope, the seams are there. Alright, that's a problem for later. I'll solve that at the end of the video. So the Z buffer. This is something that merits talking about eventually. This is how the Z buffer is how the computer knows what is in front of other things. You can imagine the screen, the application surface that the camera is rendering to, is a grid of color values. It's basically a big array of red, green, blue color values. The nerds among you will probably know that by the name of the screen buffer. And the depth buffer is something very similar. GameMaker doesn't give you too much control over the depth buffer aside from turning it off or on. The depth buffer is, and I'm starting to twist my tongue trying to say that, depth buffer. You can think of it as a screen-sized array of distances from the camera. And when you're rendering stuff, the computer will check to see if the thing that you are currently trying to draw on the screen is closer or farther away than what's currently on the screen.
Hey.
If it's closer than what's currently on the screen, it draws it. If it's farther away, then it doesn't draw it. And that is the extreme oversimplification of how things are able to appear in front of other things, in front of and behind other things in computer graphics. So what GPU set right enable does is it skips that step. GPU set right enable and GPU set test enable, they both they do the two halves of that. As you can imagine, right enable is whether or not the depth value is saved to the depth buffer, and test enable is whether or not the computer is checking to see if there's anything in front of the thing you're trying to render. So when we turn that off, that information is not saved, and as far as the computer is concerned, when we draw the skybox, it is an infinite distance away. Its depth is not saved. It doesn't matter that it's a 32 by 32 box around our head. It might as well be way the heck off in the distance, and anything else that you try to draw will just be drawn over that because there's no depth information saved. In some computer games, if you enable a ghost camera and just fly around the world and you just zoom around the world in ghost camera mode, sometimes you can see an actual cube like way under the floor or something that serves as the skybox that is rendered before everything else in the world. I used to like to mess around with the old Harry Potter computer games way back in the Unreal Engine 1 days, and I found the skybox cubes and I thought they were the weirdest things ever. And then I learned how 3D graphics work. Fun little aside about me. So with that said, since the screen is essentially being cleared to the skybox, you don't need to draw clear the screen anymore to essentially erase whatever was on it in the previous frame. Instead, the screen is already going to be cleared to the Skybox. Let me actually run the game now after deleting that line and see if that fixes the seams issue. And that looks like it did. Okay. So the seams around the corners and edges were just there were remnants from the screen being cleared at the beginning of the draw event. Okay, that is the Skybox. I'd say that looks pretty good. This test grid looks a lot brighter than it did before. So you can use this however you want. You can use this for a nice cloudy sky like I am right now. If you're making a game about outer space or something, you could give it a nice like a star field and some pictures of nebulae or something like that. If you're making a game that takes place completely indoors, like a dungeon crawler or something, you might not necessarily need this. It's just one draw call. It's just one vertex submit, so it's not super computationally expensive. Although it's not free either, because you still have to load and unload the texture from memory. But for the most part, it should be fine. Those are Skyboxes. Thank you to, I'm sorry, I can't remember who asked about these in the YouTube comments a few days ago. I'll put your name on screen right now.
Hey.
It's not something I would have even thought of thinking about, of talking about, until you mentioned it. And I do think they add quite a bit to 3D games. If you want the code, a link to the GitHub and all other relevant pieces of information, all the other videos that I've referenced are in the video description. I don't have a Patreon, but I have a nice donation link down below if you found that useful and you're feeling generous. My name is Dragonite, and I will see you all later.